Yes. Good morning. Good morning, y'all. How are you today? Coffee Conversations with Greg J is on. Yes, Thursday. We have a great conversation for you today, reaching across the diaspora, reaching across these United States, reaching across to Africa, wherever we are, we're always reaching to find out the information just for you, inspiring, informing, innovating. That's what we're doing here. Coffee Conversations with Greg J. Check in with us. How you doing? COVID. We try to get I guess y'all try to get the vaccines and whatnot. Talking to some folks who are going to continue to bring some medical professionals through here so we get all of the full 411. I know some of y'all are skeptical. I am. I ain't gonna lie, but I think it's really important that we get the information so that we can make our own decisions, right? It's not about spreading rumors and conspiracy theories and all of that. I mean, yeah, there's a history out there in these United States, but I think in this day and time, we have access to information. We have people who look like us in key positions who can give us, the proper information. So we are striving to bring them to the table here, so that we can sip coffee and talk about it. Hey, let me know, convince me, because we need we need some information. Is that right? Man, Black History Month is going on. I mean, we're today blessed, so super blessed with a gentleman who is, here in Southern California, where we originate. We're over here in Long Beach, California, but we broadcast to the world. We pride ourselves on being global. This brother here is over in what they call the Inland Empire. Those of you who are watching and not from this area, Southern California, LA, Long Beach. I'm out here by the water. Our brothers out there in the desert or by the desert, near the desert of the Inland Empire, and rich legacy of creating Black history, generations worth of history out there in San Bernardino, Riverside, those areas like that. And we're going to talk a little bit about, Black history artifacts, Black history in press, in the Black media, Black history in education, because he is a member of the Board of Education. So we just really need to get at him on this. Come on, we've got the kids doing their lessons on computers. How long is that going to last, right? So we're going to get right on into it. But, it's really interesting that we live now in a generation where, now, we grew up with, Ebony, Jet. We grew up knowing about slavery, Jim Crow. We see the pictures online of the signs of, colored only, whites only, the artifacts that, have us in caricature. Did you know that they replaced Aunt Jemima? They like changed the whole brand on us, right? And if you guys recall, she used to be a mammy type character with the do rag on. Then they decided to give her a hairdo and some pearl earrings and whatnot, and just try to soften the image of her because we were saying, hey, that's a racist image. And now they just said, forget about it. We're just going to retire her face altogether, change the name, and that's what's up, But this is the history. This is American history, and so we are, we're in that space where I know some people, and hopefully we'll be having them on in the next week or so. I know some people that have a tremendous, you hear me, with all caps, tremendous collection of artifacts from Black history, slave chains, advertisements of slaves being sold, using the Black babies for alligator bait. It's just a lot of stuff that these folks have collected, and we're going to have them on and actually give us a mini tour of their collection. Our brother that we're bringing on today, he's an educator. He's high up there. He's on the Board of Education, so I'm going to call him a super academic. And we're going to talk about Black history. Let's waste no more time. Bring him on. Ladies and gentlemen, Hardy Brown II. Good morning, sir.
Morning, good morning, good morning.
How are you today?
Great. You know, when you
All
when you see your on camera, you start to say, "Okay, wait a minute, am I dressed right?"
right.
You remember, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm just having coffee, just with a few of our phones."
That's right. That's right. Good stuff. I like the bow tie you're rocking there, sir.
Thank you, thank you. I'm actually going to speak at a number of schools today, all over the Inland Empire, and so I got to make sure that we look sharp for the students and the teachers. And so, yeah, that's the bow tie today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Got to present that positive image, especially black male image. The kids need that, and that's a
Hmm.
good thing. Go on with your bad self, sir. Hey, listen. So, okay, first of all, let's just get into the education thing here. Now that we have you here, Mr. Brown,
Let's do it.
doggone it, kids are online. Y'all up there arguing whether to open the schools or not. What's the deal there, Mr. Brown?
So, I don't think people are arguing for just argument's sake, right? I think that people are scared,
Mm,
and as people are scared, they don't know what to do, and this includes policymakers. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at experts. I am a father of daughters, and me and my wife have been married for 25 years, and we have one daughter who's out the house, but is in her doctoral program, and the other daughter is in middle school. And as a middle schooler, yeah, we deal with that. That is something that we deal with. But as a board member, these are conversations we have at our board level. And the one thing that we always talk about is no matter what, we always think of the students first. So even if we
mm,
disagree, and we have different people from different persuasions because we're a county board and we're the largest county geographically in the United States of America. And so with that, even though we disagree, we always think about the students first. We think about the staff, making sure that teachers are safe, making sure that staff is safe, and we follow the CDC guidelines or whatever we need to do. So we
mm.
work together on a team in that point. So as long as we come together there, we can go back and forth on other issues. But when we think about safety of our team and our students, that's the most important thing.
All right. So state government says, hey, you can let them back into school. You all at the Board of Education, I know here in the Los Angeles area, Board of Education says, okay, everybody go back to school. The teachers are
Yeah.
like, no, man. Well, how do you handle that?
Like I said, it's a conversation.
Mhm,
If they don't feel safe to go back to work, these are things that we have to have real conversation and dialogue with.
mhm,
And I talk to our CTA president here in our county on a regular basis. I talk to our team leaders on a regular basis. But on our side, the way the county board is set up is
mhm,
that actually really goes through the superintendent. We're actually set up differently than a traditional school district, and
mhm.
so the county superintendent really manages that, but with all of our input coming together. And so we talk to them, we have conversations. Even when we disagree, we come back and we say, what's best for our community? How do we keep people safe?
Mhm, mhm.
And I
That's right.
love the conversation that you were starting with the chains and the history of things that happen. Gator bait. I guarantee you that most people have never heard of some of those terms that you talked about today.
Right. So that's I was just getting ready to transition here into the core reason for our coming together to sip coffee is that to examine Black history, and it's really funny. Uh, they're having the Pan African Film Festival is happening in LA. Well, online, so I
Hmm.
guess to the world. And so the film 41st and Central, which was created by my brother, he passed away from COVID earlier this year.
Sorry to hear
Gregory
that.
Everett, may rest in peace. But it's a phenomenal documentary about the LAPD versus Black Panthers shootout.
Wow.
Back in the '60s, and I was beginning. I got enthralled in looking at all of these documentaries and news reports from back in the day, looking online, and
Yeah.
I'm like, man, it's really interesting how they twist history, or there's nuggets of history, American history, from our perspective that we just don't learn in school and everything. And so, with your collection and our good friend Sharon and David McLucas, and their thing is called Forgotten Images, and part of that is
Wow.
the gator bait. They took the slave babies, the newborns, and put them out there in the water to catch alligators and
Yeah.
make boots and alligator meat and all that kind of stuff. People
Yeah,
don't realize those types of atrocities. Mhm.
yeah.
Now,
They
of
don't
your
realize that.
collection, what's your favorite? Like when you're an educator and you grew up around this stuff, but what makes you say, "Dang"?
Right. I'm sitting here looking at all my pieces right now, and I'm like, "Ooh, I want to put my gloves on. I want to have this conversation." So we own over 5,000 pieces through our foundation, and many of them were donated from different collections. And so we have the Isaac's collection, which is a collection of over 1,000, almost 1,000 pieces directly from Africa. And they're all beautiful pieces that were brought back, including a beautiful Cora and a bunch of other things. Then we also have our Ebony Jet and Essence magazine that we're still curating, going through. As of today, we have most of the pieces from those that have ever been printed. We have all the hard copy printed pieces. Then we have all of the Black newspapers. So my family has owned the Black Voice newspaper in Riverside for, I think next year will come up on, or actually this year will be 50 years.
Wow.
And with that, we've collected all the history and all the stories and all the different things through my parents and now my sister over the last 50 years of just what's happened here in the Inland Empire, trying to tell that story. And now we just recently, our newest collection has been, we've been looking at the freedom movements for the last 24 years, doing Underground Railroad tours. But one of our historians passed away, Jerry Gore, out of Maysville, Kentucky, and he never had children. And his family donated these pieces to us. So now we have over 5,000 pieces that go from pre slavery all the way to current days. But we're looking at it from a worldwide impact. So we're even studying from a worldwide impact the different things that people have done to look at and move the concept of freedom further along. So
wow, that's incredible.
So I guess if you go back to ask that original question, what's your favorite piece? There's so many. It's like all the children.
Right.
There's so many. But what I look at for my favorite piece is probably any piece that other people have not seen. So, for example, right now I'm looking at a book, and I'm going to put my gloves on so I can grab this. But I'm looking at a book right now that most people probably have never heard of. But it's the real story of Josiah Henson, which is the story of Uncle Tom. And when we talk about Uncle Tom, especially in our community, what happens is we say, "Oh my God, you're an Uncle Tom, you're an Uncle Tom." But if they go back and really research the story and understand about Josiah Henson, and then you understand what happened with the changing of other groups taking that and turning that into a minstrel type of character where they look a certain way with elongated faces and lips and all these different things. But this man was a man of virtue. This was a man who was a good man, who, when you read his story, you actually walk away inspired. That's the kind of story that I love to be able to tell, because the work that we do in our community is trying to bring people over to allow them to have the space to become freedom fighters. I want them to be freedom fighters of today using yesterday's history, if that makes sense.
Wow, that makes all the sense in the world to me, because you can't go forward. It's like the Sankofa, right? Looking backwards. Still moving forward. Very good. Okay. Now, let me just ask you, all right. So while we were offline, you were showing me a Jet magazine and brought back so many memories, Let me look, nephew, y'all don't know nothing about this right here.
Right. So, they don't know nothing about this.
They don't know nothing about that. It's interesting. So Jet magazine and Ebony and all that they've been in the news here lately. They ended up having to try to sell their photographic archives, and they went from print to digital, which is, kind of look at that Jet magazine, right?
Yeah.
And then you had the famous Jet centerfold. You had the Jet. What was it? The Beauty of the Week. That was the
Beauty
one.
Of the Week. Beauty of the Week.
You had well, speaking of people, was in Ebony, and then I'm trying to remember the first part where they would highlight, influential African Americans in the beginning. I used to always tell my mother I was going to be in Speaking of People. I told her I was always going to be one of them, but I haven't made it yet. But I used to tell her, it's good stuff. So, just so Jet Magazine, Johnson Publications, gone through quite the road here lately.
Right.
And now we have Junior Bridgman, former NBA player, has now purchased it, and
Mm-hmm.
prayerfully is gonna get back to its former glory and all of that. What's your take on that? And you're you guys are a news family, black media family. What do you feel about that? Because it hit me in my gut as a broadcaster.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, I was in Chicago, I want to say maybe 2, 3 years ago, and I was going around looking for the building because I wanted to take some pictures in front of the building. And I was thinking about just the impact that they made. And I was thinking about the impact of the Chicago Defender. And I was thinking about
Mhm.
like our impact here in the Inland Empire with the Black Voice News and covering the stories here. And throughout time, from Ida B. Wells to Frederick Douglass to all of these amazing publishers, what you see is us telling a story that is not told in other publications.
Mhm.
I've
Mhm.
actually even taken some Life magazines from back in the 1960s when certain things happened, like
Mhm.
the Emmett Till case. I
Mhm.
wanted to see the difference of the story that was covered with the Emmett Till case in the Black press and the Emmett Till case that was covered in the larger United States press and how they would cover
Yes.
it. And it's just interesting to see that there's such an importance in us telling our story. Because if
Mhm.
we don't tell our story, then nobody will know. And
Mhm.
now, as I go back and I look at stories, even dated back into the 1700s, it's the same exact thing. I'm reading books that are from the 1700s, and I get inspired when I see Equiano's book, and I look at that and I'm like, wow, he was telling his story back in the 1700s.
Mhm.
And so it's always important for us to tell our story, to make sure it in writing, because that's the one thing that will continue on. Historically, we are a past that the griot storyteller, and we have these conversations that go down generation to generation. But as I'm talking to my father and my mother, I'm like, okay, tell us our story. What
Mhm.
happened growing up in Jones County, North Carolina? How did you
Mhm.
do the Great Migration to California? How do we do what we did? Where did the family go? And
Yeah.
my dad has put together just an amazing story to show that. And so that goes back to the Johnson publication. When you
Mhm.
look at the Johnson publication, it was one generation to the next generation, and do they see that same value in telling that same story?
Mhm.
Um, and so it's sad to see that it was gone, um, but they were such amazing keepers of our history, our national and worldwide history.
I think if we, juxtapose that with, black radio, same,
Hmm.
a lot of the owners, sold to major corporations. So now when you look across the country at those legacy call letters, that were the black radio stations of their cities are now
Yeah.
owned by, iHeart and all those whole thing. And
Wow.
sometimes you feel like they still try to remain black, but the message is a lot more homogenized, if you will. And I mean, that's a sad thing for black radio, but that's why at my former employer, which is KJLH, that's why folks need to give Stevie Wonder
Ah,
give
yeah.
Stevie Wonder his props because
Yeah.
I got to tell you, if it was me, I'd have sold that booger. But he has
Yeah.
held on to it for all of these years for the black community. And as a West Coast publisher,
Hmm.
when we look at our history, right? You named Chicago Defender, all of those different, newspapers across the country. And I'm talking about black radio too, here on the West Coast. I find that when we tell the story of black radio, it is always told from the East Coast perspective. You're going to hear about
Hmm.
Frankie Crocker and the Mad Hatter and all these guys, but we kind of forget the West Coast has a rich history of black broadcasting. You could, go all up and down the coast and know
Yeah.
about radio stations and air personalities, situations and circumstances. Do you find the same thing in black newspapers?
Yeah. Yeah. We hear all the different stories now. It's different because I'm in the world and I kind of grew up going to NMPA conferences and things like that. So I really grew up around the black press. And my sisters, even both of my sisters, are even stronger in this conversation because they run our newspaper portion of the business statewide as well as locally. And so they look at all these different things. But you're right. It's we're always thinking about things from the East Coast, but we don't think about what happened here. And it's the same in education. So on the
Mm-hmm.
school board, I'm the first African American to be on the San Bernardino County Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
And in being in that position, one of the things that we did is we wanted to look at the diversity and the equity of our entire county. And we were looking to name a new building that was going to be our board building. And what we did is we named it after Dorothy Ingram. Now, most people say, well, who's Dorothy Ingram? And why is she important to the story? Dorothy Ingram is the first African-American to be a superintendent in the state of California.
Wow.
And she was right here in San Bernardino.
Wow.
Right. And so all the things that she did, including writing the alma mater song for the college that she was at, the community college that she was at, San Bernardino Valley College, as well as working with Redlands, University of Redlands. I can't remember which one. I'm waiting for this coffee to kick in to remember which one so I don't mess those up. But Dorothy Ingram was an amazing trailblazer, and she lived to be 106 years old. And these are stories, we think about people from a history standpoint back east, but you're right. There are so many people that have done things right here on the West Coast that we just don't even know their stories.
We don't even know their stories. We got to keep telling our stories. Now, let me ask you this question. So now with, before I go into the question, shout out to your sister Regina. She's a fireball, boy. She's out there. It happened, y'all. That she's making sure that we are getting the stories and advocating for the Black press all up and down the state. She's an incredible woman. Yeah. Now, your dad, folks won't know, or some folks may know, some of y'all may know, but folks won't know your father is, when I Googled you, I saw the school named after your dad. I texted Regina saying, "Oh, your dad has got a school named after him." She was like, "Yep." So talk about the history, like specifically about the history of your family, your father, your mom, so the folks know who you all are, like for real.
Okay. So my family, my dad migrated out here and met my mom, and they've been here for, decades in Southern California, but we've always been here in the Inland Empire. So, that whole Los Angeles thing, once you cross Kellogg Hill, it's a whole different world out here. But there's millions of people that live out here in the Inland Empire, and this is a high level for African Americans, especially in San Bernardino and Riverside areas. And more people are coming on a regular basis. But my parents have been here for so many years that they started. My dad was actually the first Black meter reader at Southern California Edison. If you go back and look at their history, you'll see he was the first Black meter reader there. He worked for Kaiser Permanente. He's done amazing things, but he wanted to make sure he had a voice. Because he didn't want to go to work, want to say things in the community, protest, do whatever he's going to do, but then go to work and then they tell him, you can't protest or we're going to fire you. So my parents purchased and developed the Black Voice newspaper. And it was actually started by students at University of California, Riverside, but it was just a student newspaper. And so my parents turned it into an amazing professional newspaper that has been printing for, like I said, almost 50 years now. So during that time, he got involved in all kinds of other things, including the West Side Action Group, including NAACP, including anything that was happening with just the church community and what was happening in city politics and regionally and things like that. And so when he became on the school board, he's the first African American to serve 2 terms and be the president of the school board in the city of San Bernardino. And when people think, if I put numbers to it, we have over 50,000, a little bit over 54,000 students in San Bernardino. It's a decent sized school district. And so he was able to help develop a lot of the policies and things that they were doing there. And that also opened the door for many of us who are now elected into office even today. And so when the Fortunes came and they were looking to develop a school here in our area, there was no better person to name it for but my father, a man who has fought for education for years and years and years. And on the other side, my mother she was the editor and the firebrand. She is my little sister Regina. Same exact person. She was the firebrand to make sure that the voice and the fight was always going to be there. And so she worked as running our newspaper for so many years until she was called up to do even more things from a policy standpoint. My mother was elected to the California State Assembly. She was there with Shirley Weber. She was there with a number of the people who we see even today. And she made a difference even in Sacramento. And then just divisive politics and all kinds of things that happen here locally. But she is now even taken on a whole different level. My mom in her 70s went back to USC and got a certificate studying the aging population. Right.
Wow.
And so in doing that, even in her 70s, now she's working on commissions statewide for the seniors. And she's making a difference in that level as well, and passing that on to us. And so when you look at somebody naming a school after my dad, that is really the family that we come from, because they believe in giving back. And so they taught that and instilled that into us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is really interesting. We talk about how your dad came here, and
Mm-hmm.
I asked my father. My father was. I come from a military family. I'm from San
Mm.
Diego, so I know Voice Viewpoint newspaper. That was our
Oh
newspaper
yeah.
back in the day, right? And
Oh
so,
yeah.
I remember asking my dad, "Well, how did you come to California and then join the Navy?" And he came out of Texas on the train, like not like in the
Wow.
boxcar. Right?
Wow.
The boxcar out of El Campo, Texas, landed in San Diego, joined the Navy, and the rest is history. Yeah,
That
really,
is
really
something
something.
else.
Yeah, that's
Which
how
which no, go
black
ahead.
people got here, right? Came
That's how we got here.
yes, how we got here.
Which takes me back to something else I wanted to show you. So
Mhm.
this book right here,
Yeah,
let's see, put it in the camera view.
yeah.
So this book right here is called The Refugee. And when you
Oh,
think about migration, this book right here was a interview of anyone who came across the border to make it to freedom when the fugitive slave law would happen in the United States in 1850, and they made it to freedom on the Underground Railroad to Canada. They interviewed all of the different people, and they started telling their stories. I didn't even know this book existed, and we found it in Canada. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago in one of our partners. And on page 30 in the book, I grew up like in a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty. And I believe that slavery is the worst thing ever, and I would never wish it on anyone. But now that I'm free, I am free.
wow.
Harriet Tubman.
Oh, wow.
Harriet Tubman.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. And so
Wow.
there's hundreds of stories like Harriet Tubman's in these books
Mhm,
where they were able to take their story,
mhm.
tell their story, record that for time. And I think that's something we also need to look at today. When we do the things that we're doing in our communities, a lot of times we're just doing it because we're passionate about doing it, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And we forget to write down. But as a collector, the primary sources behind that, having the written word, especially in Long Beach, you guys have something that's going on, a story that's going on. I always love to see the handwritten notes of the person who wrote the article, the things
Ah,
that they put on the cutting floor and said,
yes.
oh, okay, I'm not going to put that in there. It was my original thought, but I'm not going to put it in there because it tells the backstory.
Yes, yes,
It tells
yes,
the
yes.
backstory. How did the church become
Mhm,
what it became?
mhm, mhm.
A mega church. How did it become what they became? There's all stories in the backstory. There's things that you see out front, but what happened? What were the meetings? What were the discussions? What were the arguments? What was that one thing that said, if we did this, we were going to close down, but if we did this, we're where we are today. I
Mhm.
love those stories of resilience.
Yeah, you mentioned the church, the black church, and I was going to ask you, did you see the documentary? Uh, uh,
Yes.
okay, what are your thoughts on that one?
You know, so I grew up in the AME church,
Uh,
and growing up in the AME church, I'm so excited that the stories are being told, and I always love that people are doing this amazing work. Dr. Daniel Walker, who was a part of that project, he is one of our historians, and he's one of the people who have just inspired me to do the things that we do. He's out there with you in Long Beach,
yes,
and
that's
he's
that's our friend. He's been out here a couple of times.
yeah. So
Yes.
so he's the one who started to really inspire me to be able to
Mm,
get into the work that we're doing and start to do some of this storytelling today.
mhm.
And when you hear him tell these stories, you get inspired because you know that there are people whose shoulders that we stand on today. So I'm always inspired. Anything that Dr. Walker is working on, I'm 100% for it.
Yeah, that's one of our friends right there. We have a coffee conversations with Greg J. We have a whole squad of academics that we bring on and talk about people that are just well versed academically in our
Yeah.
history and culture. And boy, when me and Daniel get together, it's a whole other thing.
I could imagine. Like if he jumped on today, we'd have a whole different. I'd just sit back like this,
Right. Right.
just sit there and listen to him. Like, go for it.
Yes, yes. I saw a talk yesterday given by my friend Dr. Anthony Samad out of California State University, Dominguez Hills, and
Hmm.
his organization, the Mervyn Dimely Political and Economic Institute, African American Political and Economic Institute, had a forum on racial reconciliation, and it was called "For White People Only." And
Mm.
one of the speakers was um, Professor Glaude out of Princeton University.
Hmm.
And he took as the foundation of his presentation a book written by Elaine Locke in the Harlem Renaissance, The New Negro, right? And
Oh
he
wow.
was juxtaposing elements of that book with what he was talking about that Black people were faced with in those days, politically, socially, culturally,
Yeah.
and attaching them to what we're dealing with right now. In your collections, do you find like similarities, or like can you draw a straight line to, oh dang, that's still happening,
Oh
when you
yes.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Oh yeah, yeah. We have so many things in our collection, and I think it's interesting that it was for white folks only, right?
Right.
Because when you look at the policies and the fact that I'm the only African American on my board, but I work well with the rest of my board members, how do we take that and get them and inspire them to be a part of this movement of change? How do we get them to be a part of this movement of equity for all, for sharing all of our stories? And the way that I do it is very similar to what they were talking about there. And I didn't get a chance to go to that particular session to see it, but the talks that I do is centered around inspiring people to see other races working together for the
Mm-hmm.
concept of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, and I'm sure if my sister's watching this, or even Daniel Walker's watching this, they're probably like, "Yep, he can ready to pull something out." I don't know. And so one of the people that inspires me is this guy right here, right? This book. It's Rankin's letters on American slavery. Have you ever heard of John Rankin?
No, let me write that.
Okay.
Look, let me write
Yep.
it down.
So his name is Reverend John Rankin. This book was
Okay.
written in 1835, and what it is it's letters to his
Wow.
brother. He was a white male Presbyterian minister who grew up in Tennessee during the
Right.
time of slavery, and he hated slavery, and he
Mm.
believed that it was God was calling him to not be a part of this system. So he moves his family from Tennessee up to Ohio to the top of a hill. But what he
Mm.
does in this little town called Ripley, Ohio, is he
Mm.
partners with a black man named John Parker.
Mm.
And together they, including people within the community, come together and develop the Underground Railroad that helped over 2,000 people get to freedom.
Wow.
John Parker, the black man, would go across the Ohio River, help and grab freedom seekers as they were trying to get from Kentucky to Ohio, and they would hide them in the barn of Reverend
Mm.
John Rankin. So
Mm.
these are letters that they
Mm.
work together. So when I tell these stories, especially to people who don't look like us,
Yeah.
I'm letting them know you can be a freedom fighter too. Because
Mm.
in that particular time, there were people who fought to be on the right side of history. And when we look at today's issues, what side of history do you want to be on? How do you want
Mm.
history to remember you? When I'm talking about your story, not me, but when we're talking about your story in 100 to 150 years, what will people say about you, the decisions that you made?
Mhm.
Did you believe in putting kids in cages, or did you do something to say something against it?
Mhm.
Did you believe in equal rights for all? Did you just say it at the house so nobody saw it? Or did you go out and fight about it? Did you go out and make change? Did you write about it so that we could see it?
Mhm. Mhm.
Those are the conversations that we need to have. And I think that Professor Glaude probably was talking about how powerful we could be if we come together.
Right. It's interesting though, because those nuggets of history that there is an element of history they don't want us to. They want to hide it. Let me just say it like that. So let's talk about lynching. Okay, so
Hmm.
people don't realize that in the season of lynching, it was a spectator sport. It was
Yeah,
like they would come from miles around. They're filling up a stadium, a football stadium's worth of people would come to watch people, be lynched and
yeah,
watch Black people be lynched. And then they made postcards and sold them around and everything. It was a thing. lynching was a thing. But that's a part of history that I don't think our fellow Americans want to hear. They don't want to hear about that part, but it was
Right.
real.
Yeah.
That's real
Yeah.
American history.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's interesting is the more and more I go through and I look at some of these stories, I realize that. So you said they don't want us to know. There are
Mm-hmm.
some people who don't want us to know, but then there's also many people who just don't know. Like they've never looked up this information,
Mm-hmm.
and this information is there. The Rankin House has been there as a national as a part of the Historical Society for Ohio since the 1800s, and
Mm-hmm.
people just don't know. We're so busy with our lives that we have to look into this information to tell that story. And so I want to make sure that we get to the point where we're doing even more research and
Mm-hmm.
telling more of those stories so people know what was going on, inspire them to do more, to dig more, to research more. I mean, I pick up pieces and I start reading through those pieces and I'm like, oh my goodness, why did I never know this?
Right.
It was there, but I
Yeah.
just never knew it.
You never do it. Right.
I
Right.
never
Right.
do it because I wasn't looking it up. But now I'm wide awake and I'm looking a lot of this stuff up.
All right. So you mentioned the Underground Railroad. So now you have a tour of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
Talk about that. What is that about? I actually spoke to someone recently, actually, that Daniel Walker turned me on to. That's in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I guess
Baton Rouge.
yes, and I guess that's part of the tour and everything she mentioned. And but talk about that. How does the tour work, and where do you go, and how do you find out the route?
Right. So this also goes back to my school stuff and my parents and everything else
Uh,
because over back in the 1990s we had a situation where teachers were teaching in one of our school districts locally that
mhm,
slavery wasn't a big deal. People were happy and they were using different things to be able to tell the story. And my mother got a hold of the story, it became a huge political story here. And they were going through it. And what they wanted to do is tell the truth.
uh,
And so they started working with the school district in the county and said, how do we bring this together so that we can actually teach people the truth? And
mhm,
so for now 24 years, the 1 year with COVID, with the pandemic not going, but we started taking educators, and the route that we go is, and this is why I know about John Rankin and John Parker and many others,
mhm,
is we go from Kentucky to Ohio, Ohio to Michigan. We drive across Ontario, Canada, going through places like St. Catharines and Buxton, and that's why we know about the settlement with Josiah Henson because he was
mhm.
there, and then we go all the way up into upstate New York, where a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the freedom fight that was happening during that time was happening in upstate New York near Buffalo and Rochester and all those particular areas there. So we spend a full week there with educators so that they can then turn around and teach that back in the classroom. But it's more than a history lesson. It's really a change your life, change your put everything in the right perspective so that you can go back and make a difference in your community type of tour.
I need to go on that tour.
Oh yeah.
Hurry up, COVID.
Right. We need COVID to end so we can get back to doing real work.
Yeah, wow, that is incredible. And then I guess, man, that's a wow.
Yeah.
My mom was a quilter, and
Oh wow.
so she had quite the catalog of quilts that she made, and I know that a lot of this, when they were on the Underground Railroad, a lot of the patterns that they used were signals to those who were traveling along the Underground Railroad, and she used to always
Hmm.
talk about that. Talk about that. Look, here's Wonder Woman checking in. Great to see my bro.
I see her right there.
Yes, yes, yes. Good stuff. Good, good, good stuff. Man, this is really, really great. Now, all right. You know, what is the future for Black media, and how can we in our everyday lives begin to preserve the artifacts, the
Mhm.
mementos, the how do we get started in preserving our history? Hey, you know what? There's elements that are negative and all that there, but we need to learn now even more than ever. We need to
Yeah.
learn our history and preserve it. How do we get
Yeah.
started?
Have you seen the racist museum? I think that's what it's called at Ferris State University in Michigan. I think it's in Saginaw, Michigan. Have you heard of that one?
I think I've heard that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a gentleman there for his life. I can't remember his name right now, but African American gentleman wanted to start to look at the history of horrible things, including Gator rape babies, lynchings, all these different things. He wanted to collect it so he could tell this story. And so he collected thousands of pieces. And he partnered with Ferris State University, Ferris, almost like Ferris Bueller, Ferris State University, and they built this museum. And it's a wonderful museum that tells a story. And they were able to collect those pieces. And I think when you go into a lot of our families, I want to say attics, but that's if you live in back east. But if you go into our storage closets or our garages or places, you're going to find a lot of this rich history. You know, you go back to talk to Dr. Walker, he's going to tell you some of the research he did with looking at the Black church and how he's done things like dumpster diving, going through and finding original primary source pieces and things like that. He tells us those stories all the time. And preserving the history is important. We take these things and get them to organizations like mine and like the other organization that you talked of, and there's many other people who do it as well. And we will partner and preserve the information and develop ways for people to be able to see that information. With ours, we've toured. So this, you're seeing me here now, but this is what I'm doing my research. But we were at California, the camp. We were at California African American Museum in partnership with there, where we brought our first edition copy of Frederick Douglass, My Bondage, My Freedom. We brought chains, we brought whips, we brought letters of bills of sale, but we also brought the freedom movement that came right after it, where people were fighting every second for that concept of freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we tell those stories in partnerships with going out. And everybody has a story. I think, and as we start to wrap up here, I think about a lot of the stories that we know. So we know Harriet Tubman, we know Phyllis Wheatley, we know Ida B. Wells, we know Frederick Douglass, we know Martin Luther King. We know so many stories. But think about how many millions of people have actually walked this earth. How many stories we don't know. They're sitting in their family. They did all these amazing things, and we don't know their story. So families need to write this stuff down so that, and then if they're not going to do anything with it, get it to people like us so we can tell the story.
Right. Let me ask you a question. Okay, so you obviously work in a very conservative environment, and as you become an agent of change and try to awake people to our history. So you mentioned slave chains. Okay, it doesn't get any realer than that. Okay, okay, what do your white counterparts say when you show them slave chains? I mean, you know what?
Hold on,
it happened.
I'm gonna ask my wife to grab them for me. Hold on.
Okay.
So we did a PBS special, and my wife is grabbing them for me right now. We did a PBS special, and one of the specials you can actually, if you want to link to it, it was a PBS, and we talk about historical empathy. And in doing that, I always surprise them. And I'll bring out things like this.
Oh, wow.
Right? I'll bring this out so they can see it. And I'll drop it on the table because I want them to feel the weight of what people went through. I want them to feel the weight of what people went through. And then as we do that, I talk to them about what it must have felt like through the writings. I'll grab a book like Harriet Jacobs, The Life of a Slave Girl. I'll grab one of these books and I'll read a passage from these books and I'll show them the chains or the whips that go right there next to it. And you see the light bulb go in, because then I ask them the question, what do you want history to say about you? What do you want history to say about you? And then here's what happens. So this one is one we don't bring out a lot, but we found in a wall in Kentucky. These are shoes of an enslaved person.
Wow.
Who worked from sunup to sundown in Maysville, Kentucky.
Wow.
The same wow that you have is the same wow they have. And so I had a conversation with the gentleman at one of our museum settings, and I was asking him, this is what it is. And we were talking, and he says to me, he's a white gentleman, older, and he says, I don't know if you should be showing this stuff. It's tough for kids to swallow. It's tough for me to swallow. I'm sitting here wanting to well up and cry. And I said, here's why you have to show it, so that you never forget and you never allow it to happen again. And he says, okay. And he leaves. And I didn't hear from him again. And about a couple of months later, He sends me a letter, and in the letter he says, I thought about what you were saying, and you were right. He said, in my family, we have a dark history that I've always tried to hide. And I want to make sure that we do not perpetuate that. So I'm going to send you this so you can always tell the story of how you met a man and you changed him through your stories, and he's going to become a better person. So this is my grandfather, Nazi
Wow.
Patch.
Oh, wow, wow, wow.
And he said, I want to be better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the
Wow.
change that I'm trying to make.
That's powerful. That is very, very powerful. It's interesting. I was bused to school, and busing was first hitting California back in the day, right? And when I began to go to the white schools, it was my first encounter with Jewish people. I had never met them
Wow.
before. You hear about them in church or in Sunday school, but now I'm
Right.
meeting them. And I remember, their parents were saying stuff like, "Never forget, never
Never
forget."
forget.
And I would tell my mom, I would tell my mom what the other kids were saying, and she would say, "Well, you know what? That's right. Never forget." And
Never forget.
that was what she would always say. Man, I know you got to get out there and go talk to our babies out there in the Inland Empire.
Yeah.
You got to come back. Just know you always have a open door here. Coffee conversations. Let's sip some coffee and chop it up again. This is
Oh
great.
yeah. Bring me on when we have Dr. Daniel Walker on there, and then we just sit here and just talk all day. I'll just sit there and
All
listen.
day. Yes, 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 yes. I mean, yeah, that's the homie. I was actually
Mm-hmm.
trying to get him on today. He has a class around this time, so we got to work it out. His schedule,
Oh
the way
yeah.
it is right now, is a little tight. But Dr. Daniel Walker and I, when we get together, I'm gonna send you the link to one of our conversations when we were talking about how in church the musicians will jump into like Funkadelic or James Brown. Yeah, good guy, Dr.
That's good
Daniel
stuff.
Walker. Yes,
That
yes.
is good
All
stuff.
right, y'all. Yeah, we're a little early here today. We want Mr. Hardy Brown II to get on to his duties as the Board of Education for San Bernardino County. He's doing his thing. We're proud of him. We're proud of his family. Regina Wilson, we see you out there. Thank you,
Oh
thank you,
yeah.
thank you, thank you. Just some powerful people. This is what we're doing out here. Black people of excellence. And, we want to inspire you. We want to keep you informed. That's what we're doing, Coffee Conversations. Next week, we're going to keep it going. I will, before I close out, I will share with you. So the California Black Media Network had an article about sundown towns, right? Where,
Mm.
towns you would be surprised, where you live. A couple of years ago, you couldn't be there after sundown. And I tracked down the professor that they quoted in that article. And next week, he'll be with us to share information
Wow.
about the sundown towns. I think it's University of Virginia or somewhere back there, back east. He's going to come on and talk about his study and what that's all about. All right, y'all. Whew.
And the next time I come, I'm going to bring my law books and we'll go through all the laws. I actually own all of the laws of the Confederacy, and we own all of the case law from 1805 through 1870, everything from Supreme Court all the way down to the local appellate cases. And when you read the actual laws and the cases, it will rock your world. We know of a couple, but we have all of them.
Where do you keep all this stuff? It's like, okay, wait. You got a wife, so I know you
Yeah.
got a gang of shoes and stuff in there. And then here you come with all your books and artifacts and whatnot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we actually we have a full archive and that we keep all of our stuff in. But yeah,
Right.
she allows me to have my flexibility of going through and just I got a new book. I got a new book from a rare bookstore from overseas. So yeah, she allows me to do that.
Yes, yes. All right, y'all. There we have it. Hey, love one another. Love one another.
That's right.
Love one another.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, you're welcome. Peace and blessings.